Hello and welcome back to another Commission Corner here on the Arcane Forge. My name is Josh and today I'm going to take you through one of my recent illustrations that I did for one of my patrons. Those of you who don't know, all of my patrons every single month are entered into a raffle because so many people really want commissions, which is lovely and I would really love to accommodate them, but I don't have the time to do all of them. So I do a raffle instead where patrons at every single level have an equal chance of winning a commission. And recently, one of my commission winners, George Punton, came up with an absolutely fantastic concept for a character that I was really excited to draw called Orys Daoson, also known as Quarry. Probably one of my favourite drawings that I've ever actually done. So I'm really looking forward to taking you through this commission corner. So let's get started. So today's commission is actually one of my favourite drawings that I've ever had the good fortune to draw. I really like drawing Genasi in particular. I find there's a really fascinating feeling about elemental people, and I really like as well, there's a lot of art that I've seen in the past where Genasi tend to have these kind of like flowing patterns and tattoos that, I mean, I'm a big fan of tattoos anyway, but these sort of inbuilt patterns in their skin and things like that, there's something about that just really fascinates me. So I was excited to get the chance to draw a Genasi for George Punton. George Punton was the person who won my Patreon raffle for a commission. For those of you who don't know, my patrons on Patreon get a lot of interesting control over the channel. They get to vote on which Monster Mondays and things come up. They get lots of voting things when I'm not sure what I want to do next, and I'm sort of torn between various decisions and things. But as a thank you for your support, patrons at every level basically are entered into this massive raffle at the beginning of the month where I use a random number generator to select a single patron, and whoever's name comes up gets a character illustration for, as low as $1. Basically, they've already become a patron, and there are various pledge levels from like $1, so from like £1 up to £50 at the moment is kind of where my pledge levels stop. I mean, you're obviously always welcome to pay more than that if you so desire, but the point is everyone gets a kind of equal chance. So there's a good chance of getting a commission from me for a single £1. And I think commissions are one of those things where it's probably the most requested thing from me. A lot of people want commissions. A lot of people message me and ask for commissions. It's something that I used to do a lot of the time, but I just couldn't really maintain it. And they take a lot of time. These illustrations take, hours and hours. And it kind of becomes this thing where, am I earning more money from commissions? But if I do that, then I don't have enough time to kind of like research videos and things like that. If I was purely an artist and I wasn't making Monster Mondays and other things like that, I would probably open up commissions. But this way I get a nice balance of getting to make content for everybody, and I get to do some commissions for people, and also it's a nice reward for my patrons because they've taken the extra step and are helping me to make content, basically. There's costs for an Adobe membership so that I can actually have drawing software, making sure that the lights stay on in my house, and feeding Myrtle and so on. There's lots of expenses. All my videos take several days to research and draw and record and edit and so on, so they help pay for all of that time that I would otherwise have to be spending doing another job. So it's a nice way to say thanks. But George Punton's name came up in this Patreon raffle, and I asked for a brief description. I really like this kind of system because previously when I used to do more commissions, I would ask for a lot of information and I would sort of flip-flop about how I wanted to, getting information from the person whose character this was, coming back to them for critiques and so on. But with this being like a possible like $1 commission, £1 commission, whatever it is, I just ask for a short description, I go for it, and then sort of what I come up with based on your description is what you get, rather than having this sort of myriad of information that's like far too dense for me to sift through to make this character, which I really like. So I still get a lot of freedom in terms of how I want this character to look when I make a commission, and you get pretty much what you've asked for, which is great. I asked George if he had such a character and could give me such a description, and he described Orys Daoson to me, whose nickname is Quarry. With Dao being part of their name, Or being part of their name, and their nickname being Quarry, it's no surprise that this character is an Earth Genasi, and they work as an enforcer or problem solver, apparently, for a local mining company. George mentioned that he is a sorcerer of one kind or another, basically using a homebrew system to add more of the kind of earthbending elements from Avatar: The Last Airbender into the sorcerer's spell roster, which I really love. I've done the same sort of thing with a fire sorcerer. In my own campaigns, I have a kind of Genasi or a kind of genie origin, elemental origin sorcerer homebrew, which I wonder if I put up on my website or not. Either way, it's something on my to-do list because it's worked out really nicely. I really enjoyed it, and I would really like players to have access to this as well. But he's come up with his own version of it that seems to fit the character really nicely. So there's this kind of earthbending elemental kind of feature to it. There's lots of gravity magic, there's lots of stone shifting, and this ties really nicely into his elemental heritage. George told me that Orys was very physically large and imposing, and his skin has a kind of metallic, silvery grey colour to it. And when he's using his sort of earthbending magic, you can see his veins begin to glow through his metallic skin, and they look kind of like molten magma or volcanic lava beginning to spew forth, maybe perhaps cracking some of this metallic skin, which I really loved the idea of, and I definitely wanted to make that a feature of this character through the illustration. I also wanted to include some of these kind of like Genasi style tattoos that I really like, that I would traditionally have a bit more kind of flow to them, but being an Earth Genasi, I wanted to have a lot of sort of regimented shapes, a lot of angles, a lot of blocky, thick lines, because, you know, that kind of says Earth to me, very grounded, very regulated, very structured and ordered. So I gave them this same sort of glow as we carry on. George told me that he has the ability to assume a more resilient and stony form, perhaps increasing his armor class, and as such, he wears very sort of loose-fitting clothes to accommodate this change so they can kind of expand and shrink as needs be. And also, as a kind of earth elementalist, that the kind of earthbenders in Avatar: The Last Airbender definitely use a lot of movement in their spellcasting, something that I really like to include in my own campaigns as well, with spellcasting being almost like a dance, with physical forms being part of this kind of like conjuration process of elemental force for almost all forms of magic, with magical rings, sigils and so on appearing physically in our world, but they're sort of conjured forth through channeling your body into particular shapes and movements, almost like a martial art. And as such, robes and loose-fitting clothes would definitely be essential, and I really like the idea of including that in this character, so I'm glad that George was on the same page. He mentioned that he would like Orys to have a long waistcoat, or something like it, and very baggy trousers. Long waistcoat was a difficult thing to kind of manage. I think during the sketching phase, I have a bit of trouble thinking about what a long waistcoat might look like. Initially, my mind went to places like the second Matrix film. There's a lot of sort of Japanese or perhaps Chinese kind of clothing that has this kind of sleeveless, bound at the front kind of feel to it, but then dangles down from the hip area into this long sort of pillar-like shape. I tried a few things like that, but with the pose that I'd come up with, which I felt exemplified Orys's kind of personality, this flowing waistcoat-like shape contradicted with what I was kind of thinking here, so I had a little play around a little bit. In the end, I kind of pulled the waistcoat out from where the sort of hip area would start and had it sort of flow outward like a kind of bell shape, I guess, to get the overall flamboyance and sort of charisma that this character would exude, as well as keeping to what George had asked for. George specifically said that, like his Dao ancestors, Quarry is obsessed with displaying wealth and wears the finest clothing as much as possible, including things like jewellery, gems, gold, lots of sort of inlaid patterns and so on, as much as he could conceivably carry and afford. So I was definitely sure to make sure that the puffy baggy trousers had a lot of this kind of like gold trim to it, these nice kind of golden patterns. He has a lot of rings on, these very large kind of like armbands around his legs and things. I don't know if that's very practical or not, but I thought it seemed very excessive and therefore very in keeping with how George had described Quarry. He also said that Orys has immaculate facial hair, potentially embellished with beads. I thought about this, and it seemed like a really great idea, but the face was becoming quite busy at this point, so I decided to opt, instead of having beads in the beard, to really shape the beard, again in this kind of like Earth Genasi kind of angular way, pushing the beard out to the sides to make this person look very, very masculine and have this kind of like deep-rooted strength in even his face. Order, structure, rigidity, and kind of like these angular shapes. I thought that was enough sort of unusualness in the beard to make it very striking, and also very clear that this person takes care of their facial hair, that their appearance is something that they're obsessed with. He said that Orys had rusty coloured hair, maybe some emerald green in the eyes for some contrast. I found that didn't really work with the colour palette, as you know, I kind of like to use a limited colour palette as much as possible. So there were some purples and some greens in the clothing, and certainly in the gems and things like that. But I wanted to tie Orys to the rest of his outfit and things like that while he was casting magic. So I made sure to have kind of burning, glowing, molten magma-like eyes in the end. That's not to say that normally you wouldn't be able to see Orys's green eyes underneath there when he's not casting magic, but I just thought that made the eyes pop a little bit. He specifically requested a lot of purple in the clothes, which I really enjoyed. Definitely fit with the rest of Orys's colour palette here. And I made sure to give him these kind of finely woven, expertly maintained hair here, tied up into a bun at the back. It just says sort of almost regalness and opulence to me, while still being, pardon the pun, down to earth. I wanted to include this kind of stony form that George mentioned, maybe only in part, so I've got him sort of grasping at one side, casting some of this stony magic, this kind of earthbending magic, some sort of large stones and rocks beginning to levitate into the air, and I have his left hand, our right, but his left obviously, beginning to form into this stony shape with this kind of molten magma appearing underneath it as evidence that he's casting a spell. I also made sure to include a pick in the corner here next to this kind of shaped stone that he's standing on top of somewhat triumphantly, because he works for a mining company. Obviously not that he would really need a pick, being this master of earth elements, but just as a kind of nod to his origins and his employment. And I was really satisfied with the result here. I sent this back to you, and he requested that instead of having these shoes that I put on here, these very, very sort of like regal slippers, that instead he could perhaps be barefoot. Now, usually changes like this at this stage are something that I can't do. You know, when it's past the sketching phase, I don't usually allow changes because that's a huge amount of effort. There's loads of layers to go through. There's lots of changes. It's a real time sink. If I was doing a normal commission, I would probably just say, like, if you want to, but that will now increase the price of the commission because I need to go back in and spend several hours changing things. Or no is the other option. But I had actually considered this as well. I really wanted to give Orys bare feet, and I don't know where I got the idea of giving him shoes. I think I had just sort of shied away from giving him bare feet because that seemed like, I don't know, it didn't seem particularly regal, but the idea of having his feet constantly in contact with the ground as an Earth Genasi just seemed right, and it was something that I wanted to do. Also, I wasn't 100% satisfied with the slippers, so when George came back to me and said, is there any chance, very respectfully, that we could change that, I said that I probably wouldn't have time, I probably wouldn't be able to, but if I could squeeze it in, I would give it a go. And in the end, I did manage to find some time. I didn't realise quite how many layers I'd put into this illustration, so it was a massive pain in the butt. In future, probably not going to do that, but I did agree to it and eventually came back in and altered the feet, and I am really happy with the result. I think it's an improved drawing despite the extra effort, and I'm glad that Orys Daoson, aka Quarry, can be realised as both George and I had envisioned in the first place, which is really nice. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's illustration, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you'd like a commission like this yourself, I'd urge you to head over to Patreon. There should be a link down below in my description box where you can go to find my Patreon page, because there's always that chance of coming up in the raffle. And as well, my patrons at the highest level have one-on-one chats with me where I do drawings for them and things like that while we chat. So there definitely are ways to have illustrations by me. And the raffle is 100% one of those ways. and I really enjoyed getting a chance to draw this character. As I say, he's definitely one of the characters that I have most enjoyed illustrating, and I think he turned out really, really great. I'm really pleased with how Orys looks. I look forward to having the chance to illustrate your character as well. So thank you so much for joining me. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Next week's video is a live stream rather than a Monster Monday. So I hope I'll get to see you on Monday for our live stream, and I hope the rest of your week is fantastic. I hope if you have D&D sessions coming up, that you have an amazing adventure. And until next time, happy monster hunting.